Hi, this is your host Sapin Bharti and welcome to another episode of TFR Newsroom. And today we have with us Boris Rensky, founder and CEO of FreedomFi. Boris, it's great to have you back on the show.
Hi, Swapnil. It's good to be here.
So let's start with what are you announcing today?
So today we're launching our first product called FreedomFi Gateway. FreedomFi Gateway is basically an x86 based commodity appliance. So it's based on inexpensive x86 kind of a switch appliance with an open source software preloaded on it. Open source piece is called Magma Access Gateway. And what it ultimately enables you to do is basically it makes it possible for anybody to build their own private LTE or 5G network very quickly, simply, and inexpensively. The way it would work is you can just basically go to our website. You can pre-order the beta version of a FreedomFi Gateway, which will ship to you in December. Once you get the gateway, what you would do is you get any LTE or 5G small cell, which you can buy nowadays on the internet. You plug in the small cell into the gateway, and after that, you can log into a SaaS portal and import the list of your users, your SIM cards, and basically, configure all the rules for your network, and voila, you have your network. You can start connecting your, LTE or 5G devices to it.
If you look at your career at the previous company that you co-founded, it was all about open source and software. But if you look at FreedomFi, especially if you look at today's announcement, it's about hardware, and hardware is a kind of challenging problem. It's about real physical supply chain issue. There are so many things that get involved when you talk about hardware. So what I want to understand from you is that number one, why are you doing hardware now? And number two is that when we look at FreedomFi, what kind of company are we looking at? Are we looking at a hardware company or are we looking at a software company?
So it's a very good question. Yes, it's true that FreedomFi Gateway is actually a piece of hardware, but we by no means are really a hardware company. FreedomFi Gateway is basically a common x86 switch appliance that we order from an original equipment manufacturer. You can get the exactly same kind on Amazon. It will just cost maybe a little bit more. Our product is actually an open source network core called Magma. And the reason why we picked hardware is simply because it's kind of an easier way to package the open source product that we're focusing on to make it easy to consume for the connectivity industry, so to speak. Because you can think of it kind of like when Red Hat was just starting out 20 years ago. How did they sell their product? They'd sell it literally in a retail store as a CD. And the reason why is because the internet is already there, but it's just the common way to consume software still at that time was to go to Price Electronics and buy a CD. So if you look at the communication space, like telecom companies in general, or wireless industry professionals today, the commonly acceptable way to consume products from a vendor is to get some sort of piece of hardware with the software and installing the software and upgrading the software, etc. So because of that, for a first iteration, what we're actually selling is a FreedomFi Gateway. But by no means does that actually make us like a hardware company. We're very much focusing just on the open source software piece of it.
So this $300 hardware is not your core business, just a means to an end. It's not the end, number one. Number two is, as you gave example of CDs and everything. So who are you targeting with this launch? Because you're also making it easier for them. Because sometimes what we feel is that, okay, software is available, but where do we run it? So I think what you're doing is to bring the whole stack so people can get the hardware, commodity hardware, without having to worry about putting too much overhead cost and start playing. Is that the idea?
So in general, the problem that we're trying to solve for all these customers is basically making it simple and cost efficient for them to build a small scale LTE network. Because if you think about what it takes to do that today, you can kind of draw the parallel to what it took to build a .com business 25 years ago. You would need to go to Oracle and buy the database. You would need to go to Microsoft and license an operating system. You'd need to go to a data center provider and rack and stack your own rack of servers, install all the stuff on it. Very complex. If you think about what it takes today to build an LTE or 5G network, very similar. You need to go to one of the large NAPs and procure the radios from them. You need to go to your local regulatory body like FCC in US or Ofcom in UK and get a spectrum lease. And there's just a whole bunch of moving parts and a lot of complexity. And what we're trying to do is eliminate this complexity, make it simple for anybody who just wants to bring up a small to medium scale LTE or 5G network. They can just get a FreedomFi appliance, plug in their small cell, configure the network through the SaaS portal, and get going right away.
So the way I look at it, if you look at a lot of industries or a lot of technologies, the way they have disrupted a lot of industry, you mentioned .com. I mean, if you look at containerization, if you look at Uber, Airbnb, they disrupted a lot of industries where you don't have to really go to a massive industry. When we look at 5G, we are looking at a lot of industries, as you're trying to alluding to that, where there are a lot of businesses, there are a lot of opportunity that can come through 5G connectivity. We cannot even kind of imagine those. So can you talk about some of the use cases that you're perceiving will be there, which will take 5G beyond? Because traditionally when we look at 5G, we just look at telcos where we're using it on our phones, but it will go beyond that. It will create new services. The access through these devices that you're coming out with will make it even more accessible. It will kind of democratize it. So talk about that.
A lot of people today are very excited about 5G because of these, hypothetical futuristic use cases. At least, what we'd like to believe are futuristic use cases. Like, we're going to have some, AR, VR, magic connectivity in a store, and we will be able to somehow magically shop with augmented reality. Or we have some, like self-driving connected cars and yada, yada, yada. And the reality of it is that if you kind of dig a little bit deeper into any of those use cases, nobody's really clear on like what they are. They just boil down to like, oh, AR, VR, self-driving cars. That's it. I think that people kind of miss the point. So there's definitely probably a lot of interesting use cases that will be uncovered down the line. But at FreedomFi, we believe that really the biggest shift and the biggest value that 5G will bring is not in those futuristic magical use cases, but in making it possible to deliver connectivity in a much more cost-efficient fashion through software-driven operations. Because if you think about how historically networks were built, it was very much about, like buying large proprietary appliances and then just like installing them. And then if you want to, upgrade your network, then you have to throw away your old appliance, bring the new appliance in place. And 5G is really the first iteration where this is changing very dramatically, where this kind of a disaggregation between the hardware and the software in the telecom network is becoming very clearly pronounced. And the components of the network, such as the network core, are really truly kind of becoming cloud native pieces of software that are agnostic to the hardware that they run on, and that can be managed in these now commonly accepted in the hyperscale world cloud native type principles. And what this does is brings down dramatically the OpEx of the network, and then what it results in is one's ability to actually now run an LTE or 5G network at a fraction of the cost of what it cost to do an LTE network in the past. So it's the substantial decrease to the operation costs, which in turn enables for us to connect the next billion people to a fast internet. That is the ultimate, I think, near-term value that 5G will bring, which is what we at FreedomFi are ultimately after, not like the AR, VR, and self-driving cars and all of that stuff.
So if you look at this space itself, there are a lot of other, open source projects. Like ONAP is a very good example at Open Networking, Foundation, where it was, contributed by AT&T, and then there were a merger of a couple of projects, and then it evolved. So why are you focusing on the core when there's already available of a lot of open source projects out there?
So yeah, there's definitely a lot of projects now in different areas that are trying to bring open source to the telecom space. And it's funny that you mentioned ONAP because that's actually a pretty common question specifically about ONAP that I've historically been asked. And the reason why we're focusing specifically on the core, the network core piece of it, is because if you look at the history of where open source traditionally brought the most value, it's a particular type of software projects. It's projects where the software is kind of close to the to the lower layers, close to the infrastructure, where it's kind of ubiquitous across the different use cases and the different companies that apply it. So to give you a more specific example, like if you look at enterprise world, where is open source popular in enterprise? Linux is how it all started, which is an operating system. Then it moved to things like the web server with Apache web server, MySQL with databases, and now we have MongoDB, containers, container orchestrators like Kubernetes. So it's these kind of things that, in terms of the software itself, they are more or less used in a very similar fashion across the different adopters, across the different organizations. When you can harness the value of the broader ecosystem and all of the problems and bug fixing that everybody does because they're using it in a similar fashion, and bring it into a single pool of know-how, that just creates just in general like a better software, right? Now, to the contrary, if you look at, for instance, pieces of software like supply chain management or CRM, etc., you don't really see that much open source in those areas. And the reason why you don't is because a lot of the value is not in the software itself, but in the coupling of that software to the business process of a particular organization. So now if you transfer that same paradigm to the telecommunications space, I think that the network core is much closer to what one would call like infrastructure software, especially if you're talking about the like data plane components of the core, like SP Gateway, MME, or UPF, if you're talking about 5G paradigm. If you look at ONAP, for instance, I would argue that it's a little bit closer to like a CRM type of software where there is fair amount of coupling to the business process. So just because AT&T could build ONAP for their specific use case and their specific workflows, doesn't mean that same exact workflows can just be taken by Rakuten or Reliance or whatever. And even if you have that base software, you still need to spend a lot of time kind of tweaking and changing it to make it relevant to one particular organization. And that is not the case with the network core, which is why we believe that for network core in the telecom space, open source is just generally a better development model. And if you were to project 5-10 years from now, there is going to be, kind of like a Linux of network core, which we bet on is going to be Magma.
Awesome. Now, since we are talking about open source, I also want to know that is Magma the only open source core there, or there is anything other components as well?
Yeah, good question. So Magma is by no means the only network core, or even not only open source network core out there. There is a whole bunch of other projects. There is OMEC, which many people have heard about. There is Next EPC. There is SRS EPC. There is open air interface implementations, and multiple, and all of these guys are open source. But if you look at infrastructure level open source projects in the enterprise space, and I think the exact same thing will apply in the telecom spaces as well, is that they tend to be a winner-take-all type of game. So if you look at how OpenStack came to be, when we started Mirantis, there was Eucalyptus, there was OpenNebula, there was CloudStack, and then OpenStack appeared. And ultimately, it just so happened that momentum kind of swirled around OpenStack, and it became the dominant, basically, cloud orchestration software. Same exact thing if you look at container orchestration out of the recent examples, right? So we had Mesos, that's been around for a while. We had Docker with Swarm. We had Nomad, and then Kubernetes, and now it's basically just all Kubernetes. All you hear is about Kubernetes. So when it comes to infrastructure level projects, open source generally is a winner-take-all game. And we believe that the same exact scenario will play out in the network core space. So there's going to be a consolidation among the many projects that are happening, and there's going to be effectively like a Linux of the network core that will emerge. Now, a sensible question would be to ask is like, okay, so why are we betting on Magma? Why do we think that Magma is going to be the Linux of the network core? Well, over the last 10 years working in the open source cloud infrastructure space in Mirantis, we were able to pick the right course 2 times in a row. First with OpenStack, I would argue, and the second time with Kubernetes. And we've always looked for 3 ingredients. The first ingredient is just how I guess kind of extensible the project is, and how well defined the northbound APIs are for the project. And that's very important because if a project is extensible and somebody who has kind of a complementary solution can easily take it and integrate with it and maybe push it into the market, that creates additional momentum. So the projects like OpenStack, which were always about like integrations, or Kubernetes, right, that has a very solid set of APIs, tend to win over projects that tend to be like monolithic stacks. So this is one, like the presence of the kind of well-defined, good APIs that enable extensibility. The second one is just sheer community momentum. So you just go to GitHub and you see like, okay, how many people are committing to this project? Are they from different organizations? How often are committing? This is just all very easy statistics to look at just by looking at the GitHub repo. Very important metric. And the third is, I guess, the presence of strategically motivated, kind of a benevolent, kind of a promoter or sponsor for the project that has a lot of staying power. So if you look at OpenStack, OpenStack came out of Rackspace that was battling at the time for dominance with AWS, and they poured a lot of resources into making sure that kind of OpenStack could outcompete CloudStack and Eucalyptus and all of these things. Another good example is Kubernetes, right? So Google wanted to win the cloud wars. They, kind of seeded Kubernetes. They spent a lot of money building it and promoting it and creating mind share around it. And the same exact thing, will need to happen in the telecom space. So if you look at all of the projects that I have described, we believe that Magma has the winning recipe. It has, the API extensibility. If you look at GitHub right now and the amount of commits and just the activity there, it's, I would argue, more than most other competing projects. And, finally, we have Facebook as this kind of a strategically motivated, benevolent sponsor that is pushing it forward, that has a staying power, to get it into the mainstream.
Boris, thank you so much for taking time out today and talk about this. I wish we could have done this in person at the Open Network, not Open Networking, but Open Infra Summit. But well, we can still talk remotely. That is good. And thanks to all these technologies that you guys are working. Actually, right now when we're talking to each other, we are using and leveraging a lot of open source technologies. So once again, thank you.
Thank you, Swapnil. Always a pleasure to be here, and likewise, I hope that sometime in the near future we'll actually be able to meet in face-to-face setting rather than over the internet. So, thank you for having me. Cheers.